Be me. Be around 1 a.m. working a long overnight shift, not scheduled to finish until around 8 a.m. Receive a call like usual, and I pick up. I begin the call like I usually would, trying to collect as much information from the caller as I possibly can to ensure that we can do everything to help. I don't get a response at all. I hear what sounds like heavy breathing, like really labored, like someone was running a 100-meter sprint while on the phone. I try my best to keep talking, thinking maybe the reception might be bad and the person can't get through to me, but it doesn't work. Along with the breathing, I hear running on what sounds like some kind of gravel surface, and they are hauling ass. They sound like they are running with all of their might, and combined with the heavy breathing, it has me incredibly concerned. I just try my best to make myself heard so that they know I am here, if they can maybe somehow hear me so that they don't hang up, and we can track the location from the phone GPS and send help over immediately. The call ends abruptly though, and that's it. Around 5 minutes go by in total before we receive a call again, and I pick up instantly. Now, in between the labored breaths, I can hear deep and heavy sobs, like when a child is inconsolable after they have been disciplined. I could hear their lip quivering, and they physically could not stop themselves from sobbing. The sounds of running on gravel were not there anymore, and I begin the call as usual again, trying to find out whatever I can. I get maybe 3 words out in total before the woman is talking at light speed, mumbling whatever words she can out of her mouth as fast as possible, only stopping for a second or two at a time, to let out a large breath and to let out a slight sob. I try my best to calm her down, to reassure her that help will be on its way as fast as possible, but that I need to take information from her, and that she needs to help me to help her. She is still largely incoherent, but I am able to make out more words the second time around. Something about underground, and held captive, and more people still there, but that was all I got. I tried to ask for her name, where she was, anything at all like that, but she kept shutting me down. She told me she couldn't tell me her name. She told me that they were after her, and that if I tell you my name, then my family is dead, they will know. I'm trying not to freak out myself at this point, and I am begging dispatch to get there as quickly as they possibly can. They told me that they were having serious trouble pinpointing her location, saying that it was something to do with the service and the cell towers that she was near, but that they were working on it, and I just needed to keep her talking while they figured it out. I get her to take a breath, which in turn gives me a chance to calm myself down. She tells me she is being followed and that she doesn't know where to go. She tells me that if they find her and she goes back there, then she is dead. Just for reference, this call took place in the state of New York, but I won't narrow it down any further than that just in case. I asked her for any details that she could give me, to just start from the top. I was trained to keep her talking and find out anything I could while help was on the way. I was told that they had tracked her approximate location and had sent out a car immediately and would try to track her from there. She told me something I could barely fucking believed, but I encouraged her to talk no matter what. She finally calmed down enough for me to understand her, and I convinced her to finally tell me her name, which I will not repeat here. All I will say is that when I checked after the fact, she had been reported missing by her family almost a year prior to this call, but the case was closed as no further clues or evidence could be linked to the case. She started by telling me that she had been kept captive underground for the better part of the year. She told all sorts of horrible things. She told me that these were rich and powerful people that could do whatever they wanted and get away with it. I asked her if she was safe, and she told me she was hiding in some sort of alleyway, and no one had caught up to her yet. I asked why they had kept her underground, and she told me that she wasn't the only person that they were keeping down there. She told me that underneath New York, these rich and powerful people had some kind of human farm that they just kept adding to every so often just to fuck with. It started out quite small, and she was one of the first that they made their move on. She had her family threatened and was told that horrible things would happen to them if she and the rest did not comply. She told me at first they would tie them up and torture them until their vocal cords were too fried and worn out to even beg for them to stop anymore. She told me that they would amputate limbs until some people were nothing more than just a torso and a head. and couldn't even function properly anymore. They were basically using them as lab rats for whatever sick and twisted experiments they could think of and were being used just for fun. I just kept giving mesham or yeses just so she knew that I was still paying attention and was taking her 100% seriously. I took a look back at my supervisor multiple times throughout the call to give a look like, "Are you hearing this shit?" But they didn't even look shocked. They looked nervous, panicked almost. We usually have 2 supervisors on shift, but it wasn't long until most of the department higher-ups were called in and hanging off of every word that this woman on the phone said. She said it started out small, but that more and more people kept being thrown in until the place was crowded. Became so crowded that you couldn't even move, that all you could do was stand upright, squeezed tight against the bodies of people writhing in torment and moaning in pain. At first, it was people who you wouldn't notice, the homeless, addicts who had lost everything, chronic gamblers who people would expect to disappear because of their debts, that type of stuff. After a while, they stopped caring and just took whoever they felt like. It was New York. Anything could happen, and it wouldn't look suspicious. It got so bad that it was becoming tough for the elites to perform their experiments thoroughly. They would have to toss in pieces of bread and other bits of food into the giant mass of people, and then they would watch them fight. People would bite and rip and claw each other over tiny scraps of food, and it got to the point where people would kill each other for those bits of food. Then the food got scarcer, and the amount of people kept growing. That's when they started eating each other. They would fight over the food and then eat the loser. If anyone became too weak that they collapsed or died, then they became more food for the slaughter. She told me that at first she thought that it was for testing experiments, some kind of viruses, but that after that it became entertainment before they just abandoned it altogether. She kept going and going, telling me about how when it was just a small amount of people, the elites would come in and inject people with weird-looking concoctions in exchange for food and other treats. She mentioned how one time a man came in offering a big, lavish meal and chocolate for anyone willing to be the next test subject. There was a young Asian man who had a really thick accent, who she thought was maybe from India. He apparently jumped at the chance and shouted over all the others and pushed them aside to be the one to be tested on. He begged for them to let him eat just a little first, telling them that he was going to die, but they promised him that as soon as the test was done that he could eat anything he liked. They wheeled in some type of gurney and strapped him down and prepared something that was in a vial. They did it right in front of everyone and didn't care. The vial had some kind of liquid, except it was too thick to be a liquid and was tinted a sort of purplish-brownish color, but it was difficult to make out in the low light. They didn't inject it anywhere into his arms, but instead injected it into the veins on his neck. You could instantly see the pain in his eyes as it hit, and he started screaming so loud that it echoed throughout the tunnel. He started scrambling and trying to break free, but he couldn't get any of his straps off. All he could do was writhe and scream as the skin around his neck started to bubble and melt until almost all of his face was peeling off. One of the men undid the straps for his hands and arms, and the young Asian man instantly started clawing at his own face. All this did was peel off more of his skin and face. It didn't take long for him to die. He physically could not stop clawing and peeling away more and more of his face. They announced that it was a failure and threw the food to everyone else. She was about to tell me more, but she got really quiet all of a sudden and wouldn't respond to anything I was saying. She started whispering down the phone, very slowly. She told me she could hear footsteps and asked me if it was the police. I looked towards my supervisor, and he nodded, and I told her that help was finally there. I told her that I was going to hang up the call once she confirmed that she was with one of our officers, but she begged me to stay on the line no matter what. She told me that there was one other guy and that he was the reason she got out, but that she didn't know what happened to him. After about another 30 seconds, I heard screaming coming from the woman on the phone. All I could hear was something muffled coming from the phone speaker, and it sounded like it was broken somehow. About a minute after that, someone hung up the call. I tried calling out to her again and again, but she didn't hear me or respond after the scream. I went on with my job as normal for the rest of the night. I asked about what happened after my shift was over, And the story I was told seemed suspicious in a way that I wouldn't usually question. They told me that an officer found her in an alley, like she said she was in, but that she was clearly high on something and screamed when she saw an officer. She apparently started fighting back and screaming at them that they were evil and that she didn't want to go back, and was clearly either a druggie or a psychopath. My supervisor told me that the officers took her to the hospital to get her cleaned up and that she passed away in the hospital from an overdose of meth not long after they dropped her off. I kept trying to press for more details from different people, but my supervisor pulled me aside and basically told me to drop it. He told me that he understood that the case was horrible and emotionally scarring, but that I was acting unprofessional and that I needed to be able to move on and put it to one side to be able to do my job properly, or that I would be forced to go on leave to seek therapy for the stress of my job. I dropped it, but I quit after another few weeks. Something about it just didn't seem right or add up. Why would the cops not announce themselves to a scared, defenseless woman who was possibly out of her mind? I would have heard it, but all I heard was a scream. No siren sounds, no sounds of a car at all. Just her scream, and then some muffled sounds once she dropped her phone. I don't know what happened, and I don't think I ever will know. I'm not sure I believe all of the things she was saying, but there was clearly something wrong with that woman. Something that they aren't telling anybody, and the thought of it scares me.
Here's one of two stories from the Emerald Isle of Ireland. My uncle and his buds are exploring the mountains in Wicklow in the 90s. He's changed some details over the years, so take with a grain of salt. There is sweet fuck all in the Wicklow Mountains, fields and forests, and then more fields, and maybe a shed. Him and his friends just want a quiet place to drink and camp. He is with Tom and Declan. Tom is skittish, skinny fucker, and always has been. Declan is built like a fucking bear. They find a place, camp with a little barbecue out of their shitty hatchback car. Typical stuff. Tom heads off for a piss in the woods drunk. Uncle and Declan have a laugh for a while, drinking and doing dumb shit. Half an hour later, Tom hasn't come back. What? Okay, what the fuck? They head off to find him. After wandering around the forest looking for him, my uncle manages to lose Declan and trips halfway down a fucking hill in the wet mud. Lands hard on something soft. It's Tom, who is staring at my uncle as if he had just took a shit on his grandmother. Tom, what the fuck are you do? Tom interrupts him with a super slow motion point towards a clearing. Uncle described it as a fucking load of pricks in robes staring at a fucking rock in the middle of the poxy forest. They are all standing silently still in blue robes around a tall rock in the middle of the fucking mountains. They haven't noticed my uncle and Tom yet. The two of them lie in the mud for nearly 20 minutes in fear. Suddenly, fucking Declan bellows, "Lads, where the fucks are yous? For fuck's sake, it's freezing." The mob spins around and immediately starts walking towards them. They run like Sonic the shit-scared hedgehog back to their camp. Start trying to pack everything. The mob is walking through the forest towards them. Leave things. In car. Driving. Home. They don't remember anything of the journey. He refuses to go camping now. There were rumors of a cult up there for decades, but that's the only proper sighting.
I was taken into foster care when I was very young. I never knew my birth parents. Didn't find out I was adopted until my teens. Had good childhood. My adoptive parents were loving, kind, and gave me a good upbringing. Every now and then, I have a recurring nightmare. Same thing every time. It's the middle of the day and I'm out in the woods lying on my back. I'm surrounded by people. Their faces are covered so I can't see them clearly. One of them grabs my head and forces me to look straight into the sun. Just as my eyes start burning, the sun begins to fade. I'm in pitch blackness, but the spot where the sun used to be is still distinguishable. It's an unnaturally dark circle. Kinda hard to describe with words, just an impossibly dark circle. That's when I always wake up, usually covered in sweat and panting. I figured something bad happened to me as a child. Whenever I ask about my birth parents and my past, my folks get really uncomfortable, saying that they don't know who they were or how I could find them. Recently went on massive road trip with a few mates. Stop in some dead-end town one night. We're drinking at the campsite when some drunk homeless guy comes wandering in. The guy is off his face. Pretty funny to watch him stumble around and spout random shit. Tell him we'll give him a beer if he can do 20 push-ups. He manages somehow, and I go to give him a beer. He gets a good look at my face as I hand it to him, and he goes white as a fucking ghost. Drops the beer and jumps back. Guy looks terrified. Points at me and yells, "This one's seen the black sun," then runs off. I've never told anyone about the dream, so this scared the shit out of me. So now I feel I should maybe hire a PI or something to look into my parents and childhood. Kinda scared about what I might find out, though.
Used to know a 60-year-old ex-aviation engineer in Bozeman. He was a professor in math before becoming a contractor for the government. Apparently, he learned a ton about physics and material science from some of the other guys he worked with and helped with some calculations on some obscure hydrogen bomb. He once rambled on about how he used to have a shape-shifting car he'd use to kidnap people in Middle America. He'd go around, crash into someone's car, and kidnap them, as his car would be untouched and he wouldn't leave a trace. As he'd drive back to his home, he'd shift the shape of his car numerous times. He also said once how he had a key that could unlock any door. He demonstrated on a couple of cars, but I just assumed it was a neat party trick. There was another instance where he ranted about different types of networking cables and how difficult it was to set up a surveillance system for his farm that could track human movement. Not too weird, but he said he'd use it for his basement if he could figure it out. He owned about 40 acres and also owned a massive underground private bunker. Creepiest thing I remember about him is that he would always vehemently disagree with the existence of aliens. Even for a passive offhanded comment, he would argue with you that there was nothing in the sky but men. Lost touch with him after I left, but some of the shit he used to say would get you thinking, but he was probably a regular old man. I remembered a couple, actually. He owned a number of clothing that was about twice the size of XXL, despite being very stout for his age. If I recall correctly, one of his old friends had gigantism. And he kept some of his favorite clothes. I can't exactly remember what he said he did with the car. I want to say it was stolen, but I really can't remember the details. Small tidbits. He had a gun that had an infinite cartridge. It didn't use bullets. Instead, he'd scoop up a load of dirt, and it shot compressed dirt balls. It seemed ridiculous then, still kinda does now. He owned cyanide teeth. Individual cyanide tooths. He even popped one in just to show me they fit. Him and another guy had come up with their own secret language. Sounded nothing like any common languages I've heard before or since, and he would occasionally write in it. He was a Freemason and actually tried to get me to join, but also told me how all they did all day was shoot the shit and plan donations to schools, so I didn't take him up on his offer. I say regular old man because that's just how he came off to me. An old man with a ton of wisdom and experience, but also a sense of humor and exaggeration to come up with crazy stories to justify his knowledge.
All right, so back in the mid-2000s, my local high school was getting targeted by Teen Challenge. It's a weird Christian help group thing that has a shitload of comments saying it's a cult, but whatever. My friend joined up since she was kind of a wreck and wanted some help, but was poor enough not to afford a therapist. After her month was up, she came home kind of worse. She told us all about what happened, which I'll talk about here. They all arrived to this old Boy Scout camp around noon after being herded into a bus. Only one bus, since there was only a certain amount of kids allowed into the camp, which was the amount one bus could hold. The camp gets rented out when Boy Scouts are out on expeditions or aren't doing that rope bridge thing. I know the places I used to be a Boy Scout. About 4 cabins, 2 for the boys there since they thought it was like a camping trip, and 1 for the girls, and next to the girls was the staff. Things are fine for the first week, just a bunch of go around the circle and say a fact about you shit. Food was mediocre, she said, like school lunch, but less filling. Snacks were sold separately and could be earned using good boy points. First Sunday of the group, they go to the outdoor stage for church in the morning. They start preaching about how God hates every single one of them, and that to clean themselves they needed to become one with the Lord. This involved obeying the staff because they were the cherubs sent from the heavens above. Any resistance to this would be met with going to the shed. The shed was the timeout room, but it was actually a workshop for Boy Scouts. So there's a bunch of saws and tools everywhere. Apparently the staff coated it in fake blood for extra scare factors, but the room stunk real bad either way. Like copper and uncooked leftover Chinese. Friend tried not to get sent there a lot, but when she did, there was probably a bunch of guys and the staff banging on the walls and screeching and laughing. She had to join in on one of these mobs once because she was ordered to along with about 15 other kids. Some were given frying pans, and others were told to just run into the wall and scream loudly. Bonfire chats happened every Sunday and every Wednesday because Wednesday was a weekly feast day where they were given actual filling food, but only warm water or warm grape juice. At night, a cabin would randomly be woken up and forced to prepare something for everyone the next day, then would get an extra hour of sleep before they were reawakened with the other cabins banging on their cabin like the shed. Exercises were basically like carry a cross across the field and back, or run around the field with a cross in hand. This went on for about 1 hour until they had breakfast, which was usually just toast and those small butter packets along with grape juice. Repeat until they get to lunch, which is just a small, square sandwich with just tuna salad in it, some grapes, and water or grape juice. Dinner was usually something bigger, like a small slice of steak or a fish, which they never knew how they got from out there every Wednesday for a month. A kid broke into the staff's cabin to get his phone to call his parents to get him out, and was made to be kept inside the shed for 3 days. But they forgot to take his phone, so his southern father came out with a shotgun, threatening the staff as he took his kid away. All were called in for a special talk where they said they were never allowed to leave until they purified themselves at the end of the month. Continue this for a month, until they get to the days leading up to the purification ceremony. All kids are scared as hell. Staff says every day will be a feast day, so at least some will be better off then. They have a small petting zoo that's brought in during the night, filled with goats, like a good 7 goats. The activities were just to have fun that last week as a way to bask in God's greatness. 3 days before they were all lined up and given a robe to wear during the ceremony. Some fit fine, others didn't even get it on, so were told to sit out and were given normal, awful meals until then. Final feast day. Some kid says the staff were lining up the goats into the shed with aprons. They fucking slaughtered the goats for meat. What the fuck? Final day ends, and at like 10 or midnight, they all get brought out with their robes on to a special, extra large bonfire and feast. All are meant to shout loudly to the stage, then to the sky, something like, "Thank you, God, Master of the world, and thank you for your cherubs," before being given their goat to eat with their bare hands. From there on, they were let loose to do whatever, and most seemed kind of crazy that night, staying up until the early morning. Friend hid in the underside of one of the cabin's porches, cold and tired. The staff sit down on the porch not knowing she's under there and talk about opening up the church more for the new converts. How much it reeked in the shed, and wondering if it'd be dry enough for next time as a joke. Then asking if they had any wine left, but they didn't because the kids were drinking it all. They got pissed, and so they went to the feast area to get some more and come back. She crawled out after a minute or two and went inside to sleep like it was nothing. When she woke up, the room was a mess, and the staff, obviously drunk, came in slurring that the whores needed to clean up. They all cleaned, the boys were already out playing, and a look into their rooms showed it was a mess. They were all given their phones and suitcases in the last hour, lined up at the bus stop, and were told they have to come back to be cleaned again. Went up to the place a year or 2 ago with her and a friend of mine who used to be a Boy Scout because she wanted to see if anything was still happening there. The cabins and a stage, which were really run down. The spot where the shed was burnt and covered up.
Wine, fear tactics, preying on children, cleansing, as if you are somehow naturally wrong or unclean. Cherubs, stations of the cross. Yeah, nah, pretty sure they're either fucked up Christians or Satanists of some kind.
That OP here didn't realize until you said that they were probably doing the Stations of the Cross with that field bullshit. I'll ask her if she has any more details, though I don't know if she'll be too keen on giving more, since it was a bad time for her. All right, sent her a text and got a response. She'll think of some and I'll post them here. Give me a solid 20 minutes for her to rant. Okay, so here's what she said. Staff's cabin had a few guns in it, from what a kid said, like hunting rifles for small to large game. The backside of the girl's cabin reeked of rotten eggs. Behind it showed there was a small, locked cellar, and that all the cabins had one like this that were all locked. Others didn't smell bad. Staff were horrible to female attendees, usually just being demeaning phrases or chores for the camp, but sometimes slurs and vulgarity, like with the original post. Upon entering the cabin for the women, the cross was upside down. Before the kids would leave in the morning, they would need to take off their robe, but since many didn't. Before they fell asleep, the staff began ripping it off by hand, and according to her friend, by a knife sometimes. The camp currently is not allowed to be accessed due to the local police having to investigate a large group of homeless people who moved in, and whether or not just to let them be, since no one owns the land anymore. Road also to the camp was closed for a solid few months to a year because of safety concerns. Still don't know if it's still closed or not, actually. Staff at the camp were just brought in from out of town for the camp, and all of them looked scruffy, to a point where it looked like they cleaned up, but not well. That reminds me, they showered in a weird staff bathhouse thing, one for each gender, and the S would use it when the kids were in there. The staff never used their actual names, and instead just called themselves Mr. or Miss. A day that it rained, all of the kids were brought out into the rain and were told to light a fire so that they could all get warm. No one was able to light a fire, and all were scolded. Art was banned outside of designated art zones on the side of the cabins, and even then they were small. Only Christian religious paintings were allowed. Bible readings would skip the parts of paganism that made it look bad. I'll post more tomorrow. Tired now.
Me and two other bros camping in the woods of the Pacific Northwest about a year ago. It was a weekend that was supposed to relieve us of our stress. A weekend to drink, wheel, shoot, and have fun like no other. Anyway, we decide to go down this old-ass logging road and go to a camping spot. Get stuck and get lost multiple times trying to find my buddy's perfect spot. Get there about 6 or 7. We get a fire going and start roasting some hot dogs cause hey, we're fucking hungry. Just about to open some brews when we hear the sound of vehicles. Lots of vehicles. I look at my friend John and say, "Hey, you were leading, did you see any other vehicles out here?" Looks at me and he shakes his head. Okay, whatevs anyway, eating our dogs and drinking our brews, having a merry old time. Getting cold out, so we douse the fire and start to hit the hay. My friend Nate sleeps outside his Tacoma, freezing his ass off in a mummy sleeping bag. Me and John hit the hay in our truck's cabs. Morning rolls around and we get to starting the fire again. Nate looks at both of us and says, "Did you guys hear anything last night? Like screaming?" I'm thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Me and John laugh and we're like, knock that shit off, man, it ain't funny. Nate is like, nah guys, I for sure fucking heard screaming at about 11 last night. Me and John look at each other and look at Nate. I say, dude, don't fucking joke about that shit, man, it's weird and creepy. Nate just shakes his head and I can for sure tell he's freaked out. John speaks up and says, well boys, if we're gonna be in a screaming wood, might as well be armed, right? Me and Nate laugh and are like, fuck yeah, get out the arsenal. We get a count. Among us, we had 2 shotguns, a pistol, an FNFAL, SKS, and an AR. We're acting all hot shit cause we think we're protected from the screaming. Anyway, we go about our day shooting shit and wheeling with drinking in between. Fun as hell day, but when we get back to camp, the mood changes. We all drive on it and shit is raided. We dismount and take stock. Nate's sleeping bag is gone and our lamps are gone. Food is strewn everywhere, but not taken, mind you. What the fuck did they want? What made us really shit bricks was sitting by a tree. A dead, gutted, and mutilated deer. And the tree it was sitting by had a pentagram drawn in fucking blood. That feel when you gut churns, and there's that somber thought that you know you're not welcome out here. We sobered up real fucking quick. Nate's like, we need to get the fuck out of here, man. Me and John are like, fuck that. We're staying, bro. He's on the verge of fucking crying and we're like, bro, don't be a pussy. Starts fucking yelling at us that we're crazy and should leave. We look at him and say, dude, if you want to leave, just leave. He does, roars the fuck out of there in his truck. We should have left, but my God, we were cocky. I apologize, guys, for bad grammar and spelling errors, trying to type it out fast. Night rolls around and we start a fire again. We sit loaded and ready to go. Whatever the fuck is out here can come damn well get us. I sit facing out towards the forest from the fire, FAL in hands. John does the same with his SKS. We're talking back and forth when all of a sudden we hear the screaming as well. The moment the screaming started, the woods got real damn quiet. Not even a cricket was chirping. It dawned on us this was no animal. It was a human scream. A girl. Once in a while the screaming would die down and you would hear chanting, cultists for sure, and from the pentagram we're dealing with Satanists. Now I know you're thinking, why the fuck didn't we get out of there like Nate did? Simple answer, me and John are fucking nuts. Trust me when I say this, it was a learning experience and now, well, we're not as cocky. Anyway. John pats me on the back and I jump. What the fuck do you want, man? Fucking look, bro, he says as he turns ghost white. Through the trees and the foliage we see light, from what looks to be a bonfire. Me and John the twits, we were doused our fire and headed in the direction of the other one. We creep through the woods and come to an old landing. We see a group of 30 plus gathered around this massive fucking fire. Women, children, old people, and some men dressed in crimson robes. On only what can be described as a stone dais laid a girl. Looked to be about 18, skinny and blonde, screaming the whole while to these people to let her go. She was writhing and crying on the dais. Lo and behold, out comes an old man dressed in robes of dark black. Seemed like they just absorbed the light itself, but in his hand was a knife. Now I'm shitting fucking bricks at this point. Muscles feel like jelly and I just want to run. Go back to town and forget we saw fucking anything at all. I whisper to John, let's get the fuck out of here, man. I start tugging on his shoulder to go when he waves me off and points to the old guy. The guy now has the knife fully raised above his head and is yelling his fucking gibberish. John looks at me and says, back me up, okay? What the actual fuck, bro? John steps out of the woods and cracks off a shot over the head of the man in black. Every fucking head whips around to look straight at me and him. They start screaming at us and coming slowly at me and John. I crack off a shot over the head of some dude in crimson. The mob stops and the dude in black comes to the front. In the most guttural, inhuman fucking voice these two will do. The man is flanked by the guys in crimson now. They're all brandishing weapons now and start inching closer. John pops off another shot. The man in black says, no one is here to help you now, I hope you know that, and smiles. I'm gonna call him Black Robes from now on. Now I'm saying a Joker-esque smile, ear to fucking ear. John yells something to the effect of stay the fuck away, and time seems to slow down at this point. John's SKS barks, round flies through the air and hits Black Robes in the legs. Dude hits the ground screaming. Crimson hesitate as they see their leader fall. Start advancing again. I put a round through a crimson shoulder and he hits the dirt. Dude's hoods comes down as he hits. Dude is a fatty. John screams, stay the fuck back. Guys stop. They look visibly shaken as we have a good old Mexican standoff. Redhead and Black Robes are screaming for help now. The kid Satanists are wailing. A line of women is standing behind the crimson screaming at us. My body is flooded with adrenaline at this point. Let's fucking rock and roll, I'm thinking. Last part after this. I will clear up something right now, though. I guess my story is more of a victory over these and not very creepy. So I apologize and I'll finish up. Screaming, crying, and mewling of children is all that I hear. Something breaks to the fore of it all. Sirens. Fucking sirens out here. John and I are still yelling at these people to stay the fuck back and release the girl. The red host starts inching forward again. John looks at me and I hear him clear as fucking day say, shoot to wound. He takes a step forward and pops a crimson in the chest and takes some girl in the leg. I follow alongside him. FNFAL barking as I either shoot for legs or shoulders. Lights everywhere, screaming. Everything goes black as I get tackled by a fucking cop. Wake up handcuffed next to a fucking cop car. Look to my right and see John. Smiles back at me and says, we fucking saved her, bro. Look into the field and see people getting ferried out of there and into ambulances or cop cars. Blonde is escorted into a cop car. One face is noticed out of them all, however. It's fucking Nate. Cops follow him as he walks up to us. Yeah, these were other two I was telling you about. Cops nod and place us in separate cars. go back to town. Now this is where the story ends. We essentially got off scot-fucking-free thanks to the blonde's testimonial. Nate's testimonial helped out our case as well. Actually, the whole town practically came to our defense, seeing as this was actually a frequent thing up in those hills. Apparently, a lot of people have seen the shit these people do and didn't fess up to it till then. By the way, if it helps, I still have that FNFAL, and my god, am I not getting rid of it.